Okay, Mike, we've got sweet spot for cyclists. We've got threshold, right? And we've got tempo runs. What the excuse my language, is a tempo run, Mike? Please tell me.
Well, it's probably the most overused, under-explained term on running. I think that different coaches have different meanings. For me, a tempo run that I talk to with my guys is a pace they can run, and at the end of that run, they feel they could run on another 10, 15 minutes afterwards. So it's a pace that they're pushing hard, but not too hard.
Right when I'm done rambling, you are going to learn more detail of what a tempo run is, their importance in your training cycles and when not to do them, how it differs from other hard sessions like VO2 max intervals, and even the base zone 2 training difference, how tempo runs relate to the gray zone, the science behind lactate, the lactic acid system, and the glycolytic system. Yes, we get a bit nerdy on that, but I swear, hang in with us and you will learn a bunch. My super special framework for having different paced tempo runs and more. I'm Darren D. Lake Runs. I've been running since 1994. I've done a sub 3-hour marathon and I'm a 10-hour Ironman triathlon finisher. And since 2012, I've been researching, experimenting on myself, and talking to experts on how I can get 1% better every day in my training, racing, and life, all to make it that much simpler and easier for you. I'll be joined on this episode by pro running coach Mike Trees, aka Run.Energy on Instagram. He's an exercise scientist and he still can run a 17-minute 5K in his mid-60s. It's pretty crazy. He's the founder and head coach of Energy Coaching, which strive to help amateur and advanced runners run their best through training plans, one-on-one coaching, and assessments. I'll stop yapping. Let's get into it.
So it tends to come in base training or early in the race preparation period where I'm just getting them used to running fast, but I still want high volume of training going. And if we go too fast, we end up losing a lot of the volume of the overall training we're trying to achieve. So a tempo run definitely comes into the 20% hard training if we have an 80-20 rule, and we could say that it is part of that block. It's if you want to use threshold as a definition of building lactate, it's a sub-threshold, it's an aerobic run. It's sort of the top of zone 2 if people like to use that zone. It's MAF, maximum aerobic pace if we're using MAF. It's probably even a little bit beyond that. It could even be technically just touching the gray zone. I mean, it's such a gray area. It's an area that we're pushing, and we're trying to maintain it for a set period of time, but we're finishing feeling strong. And I think people can over-engineer it and say your heart rate's too much of this, it's too much that, this. It's just a good, solid pace.
Let's go right into really what I want to talk about, which is how this is similar to gray zone training. And I know the gray zone is subjective, right? Because the gray zone for someone, depending on their coach, is different than the gray zone for someone else. So the gray zone can be doing a walk, can be the gray zone, or the gray zone can be doing sprints. But I think generally speaking, traditionally speaking, the gray zone is usually between zones 2 and zones 3. It's this pace that everyone, especially beginning runners, like to just slip into because it feels like you're running fast enough. You're getting your heart rate up, but you're also not running too fast. Like, how is a tempo run relate to the gray zone? Is it the same thing? Is basically what I'm trying to say.
For me, I define a gray zone as drifting into a zone you shouldn't be in. That's all it is. I don't like to say zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when I'm actually working with my athletes, I never discuss zones because we know what heart rate or what intensity they should be working at. So I might be saying to one guy, you want to be in around about the 150, make your maximum heart rate about 150. I don't use zone 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. I just talk about a specific heart rate, or someone who works to feeling. I'll say, look, for you, that's about a 7 out of 10 for effort. But a gray zone is when I say go for an easy run, and it's not really easy, but it's not really hard. It's just that you're feeling good, so you're pushing a little bit too much, and then you've gone to the gray zone. Or I'm giving you your interval workout, and it's just not really fast enough. You're not pushing hard enough because you're too tired from everything else, and you've dropped down a little bit too much. So I don't. This is where we get lots of arguments on social media. Oh, you're now telling us to run in the grey zone, and you say don't run in the grey zone. it comes down to semantics. The gray zone to me really is just running in an intensity that isn't what I want you to be doing. And so a tempo run it is good specifically when you're building up for marathons, because you need to be working at marathon race pace. And I find a tempo run is pretty good for that. So I could send someone for a 16K or 10-mile tempo run. And I say, look, you've got a marathon coming up. Let's get you running 10 miles at marathon race pace. It's not actually that hard because you have to roll 26 miles at marathon race pace, or 42 kilometers. So if I'm sending someone for a 10-mile run, which is a 16 kilometer in metric work, they can maintain that pace, or they should be able to maintain that pace for the whole marathon. So that's the kind of pace I'm asking them to do. I'm saying, look, it's quite a tough pace, but it's not too tough that you can't maintain it. If they're not training for the marathon, we will send them out at their half marathon race pace, but we'll get them only to do, maybe 8 kilometers at that pace. So again, it's a pace that's their target race pace, but a little bit shorter on the distance.
So why is it important for a 5K runner to do tempo runs versus why is it important for a marathon runner to do tempo runs?
It's less important for a 5K runner to do tempo work because they can do their 400 intervals at race pace. They can do 3x1K at race pace. They can do lots of other things to get their workout, and it's not such a long distance. For a marathon runner, you can't go out and run the whole marathon distance. So I can do a whole 5K distance workout in one session and not tire myself too much. Whereas a marathon, I can't say to a runner, oh, go out and run 42Ks at race pace. Do 42 times 1K intervals. It would kill them. So we need to do other ways of stressing the body. That's one thing. Another reason is the body becomes most efficient at what it does most. So if I want someone to run at a set pace for the marathon, I want the muscles to get used to working. I want the brain to work it out. I just want you to be comfortable at working at that pace.
With tempo runs comes the talk of lactate, lactic acid systems, lactic threshold, lactose, which is milk. My understanding is that it used to be called lactic. All of this used to be called lactic. By the way, lactose is milk, okay? This has nothing to do with this. You don't have milk running through your blood, all right? I thought that when I was like, oh, I got lactose in my system. It's like, no, it's not a thing, Darren. It's the lactic acid system. And we're getting really nerdy here. So if you want to tune out, feel free for the next few minutes. If you just want to go to why does this help me as a runner, I just like to know these wordings. A lot of people hear this wording and it gets confusing. So I wanted to clear this up. So there's the lactic acid system. Therefore, everyone called it, you have lactate in your system. But now it's actually lactate. You have lactate in your system, but it's the lactic acid system. And it's a lactic threshold test. Hold on. And guess what? Is actually in your blood, and I'm sure you know this because you're an exercise scientist, but you actually have hydrogen in your body, and that's what gets released, and that actually is what causes the burning feeling and the muscle aching later on, and what turns into DOMS later. So I hear of people, a lot of, people that don't understand how this works, they say, oh, the next day I want to flush out the lactic from my system. And I'm like, that's actually wrong on so many levels. Me trying to be a nerd, but feel free to go in and tell me where I went wrong.
No, it's changing all the time. It's actually, I think, these days we call it the glycolytic system.
Okay.
Instead of the lactic acid. So that's what the research scientists use. But then I was talking to some guys a lot cleverer than me and say, look, if everyone understands the lactate system, why do we need to sort of keep changing it? That's what we use in research, but if that's what everyone associates with it. And it's not really the lactic that gives us the burn, as you were saying. But actually, what we do is when we've found that our bodies actually can reuse the lactate that's built up as energy. So we actually reuse that as energy later on down the line. And we're trying to become more efficient at reusing the energy that is created. And the next day, so probably your lactate levels, if you were to take a test the next day, ideally they'll have returned back to normal levels. But you have the DOMS from the damage that's created, probably from the hydrogen particles in the blood. The point is, whatever we want to call it, it's this lactate, it inhibits the oxygen getting through the muscles. This is the essence of it. So if we go too fast, when the particles are built up and the lactate is built up in the blood, it prevents oxygen getting to the muscles. And we want to get as much oxygen And we want this capillary development, and we need to get as much oxygen into the muscles, the working muscles, as we can. And so that's why we're trying to limit the amount of lactate buildup in our bloodstream. And so this is where people like Maffetone was big on saying, well, we just got to stay out of that zone and stay in the aerobic zone and do aerobic development. But I think there's a time and place for everything. I think you need to work a little bit into that zone as well to become more efficient at adapting.
I found out that tempo runs were really valuable, especially if you can get in the right, I know you hate the zone, in the right heart rate, where, it's basically where you're producing just a little bit of lactate. And honestly, the only way to know that is by doing the lactate monitor testing, where you do the blood pricks, which they're expensive. 1, 2, you need to pretty much be either on a track or on a treadmill. You need to have someone else do it for you. Only pros have access to this. So this is why we do field. This is why we do pace. And this is why we use heart rate. And I'm in the zone-ish. I'm going to get myself personally, I'm going to get a lactate test done, lactic threshold test done. I want to get one done probably in the beginning of the season and then closer towards racing, so I can tighten up my heart rate zones, and then I use those heart rate zones when I go to race. So they're a bit expensive, but it's more realistic. We talked about VO2 max test. I got one done in my life. I'm never going to get another one done. My VO2 max is deteriorating as I age. It doesn't do anything more for me. So I'm interested in certain numbers because I'm a nerd like you are. This is where, Krebs cycle and all that gets really interesting. So we'll save that for another podcast.
The simple thing is with the lactate, when you're talking about numbers, is you've got the 2 millimole of lactate in the blood and the 4 millimole. These are two zones. So the classic lactic threshold that people talk about, which is between, zone 3 and zone 4, is usually where the lactate is around about 4 millimoles of lactate in the bloodstream. And the 2 millimole zone is your fat burning, carb burning boundary or threshold. So that could be L1, LT1 and LT2. So LT, lactic threshold 1, is at first turn point where you turn from fat burning to carbohydrate burning. So this is why you need to do a lot of easy running in that level, because that's what you're trying to do, is become more efficient at fat burning. And the 4 millimole level is the threshold you're talking about, which we're trying to deflect that curve a little bit to the right so we can run more at a quicker pace aerobically without building up lactate in the bloodstream. And again, as you said, you'd go into a lab or you'd run a treadmill and have finger pricks every 3 minutes. You pick up the pace and find out where it is.
I personally actually subscribe to a little bit of a theory in breaking down the tempo run. So I like being granular. I like complicating things. And I look to break a tempo run down to a slow tempo, a mid-tempo, and a fast tempo. And what I base that on is the slow tempo is between my current half marathon and marathon pace. Mid-tempo is between my half marathon and 10K pace. And then fast tempo is between my 10K and 5K pace. And the fast tempo is actually closer to what I think more people, what you would say is 60 minutes, what you could sustain for 60 minutes. I never personally understood that because I'm like, I never run a 60-minute race. Like my 10K time is anywhere from 36 to 38 minutes, depending on how fit I am. So I'm like, all right, 60-minute race. My half marathon is 1 hour, 22 minutes. I'm like, what the hell is a 60-minute race? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Whereas maybe someone that runs a 10K at 60 minutes, there you go. You could run it. So it really bothered me, that whole 60-minute, what you can do for 60 minutes. Even for the bike, it's always, the FCP to what you could sustain for 60 minutes. I'm like, what the hell bike race am I doing that's 60 minutes long? So I do the slow tempo, mid-tempo, fast tempo as a guide for myself. And that helps me. I usually actually only do slow tempo stuff, which is between half marathon and marathon pace, because that ends up being, it correlates perfectly with Z3. It correlates perfectly with, I could do this for 60 minutes. That felt great. I could tackle another 15 minutes. So that actually, slow tempo and mid tempo end up being more of what I should be in, but I always slide into that like kind of 10K pace because it feels good. When should you not do a tempo run? And I'll preface this with a quick sidebar story of the downsides of tempo runs. I'm finding out that it takes me so long to recover from tempo runs, like 72 hours plus, so 3 days plus to recover from even moderate tempo runs, like slow tempo runs, what should be most people. And I just think I'm genetically but I can recover really fast from 12 by 400s though. So, 36 hours, I'm ready to go. So it's like I'm naturally predisposed to running fast, which is, fine and dandy. But if I want to run a fast marathon or run a fast half marathon or even 10K, I need to start doing tempo runs. I've learned to be very careful about when I prescribe them.
Well, no, the thing is with tempo runs is the classic is you send two guys out for a run together, they're mates, and they're always just trying to half inch each other, one guy a bit quicker than the other, and just test how fit they are. They end up doing a tempo run for an easy run the whole way around with a sprint at the end. And so you don't want to be getting into these sort of runs when it's an easy run. The thing with a tempo run is why you shouldn't put too many in there is that they feel great for some reason. When you do them and you finish, you feel great. You got this buzz, the endorphins are flowing. But I tend to find that I don't sleep as well afterwards because I'm a little bit more tired than I feel. I don't feel that tired at the end of it, but actually you've done quite a bit of hard work. And I think people don't realize how fatiguing they are and then do another hard session too close after them. So I generally after tempo run will have 2 easy days before giving someone another hard run. And then obviously it's an older athlete, I might even give them 3 easy days. But you've just got to be careful with how often you introduce them into the training and make sure that the athlete is fit enough and ready to do them. But I like to give time trials for races and things. A tempo run is a good substitute for a time trial. Okay. It's a little bit easier than a time trial. A time trial is pretty much race pace, but in training conditions, or you're trying to get close to it. A tempo run's a little bit easier. So sometimes I might give a tempo run to someone who's nervous about a time trial and nervous about failing. I'll say a tempo run. They don't feel quite so stressed out. Oh, I can achieve that because there's no strict boundaries around it. So again, it's knowing your athletes and how you work with them. And again, it comes down to terminology. Again, it's quite a complex area, but and it's difficult to get it all through in a podcast because there's so many variations.
Yeah, you actually touched on the fatigue and the recovery needed, and I actually saw a graph from Training Peaks. I think it was Training Peaks, and they showed the glycogen depletion from a tempo run versus from an interval, let's call threshold, a VO2 max session, VO2 max building, like a 12 by 400 or even a 4 by 5 minutes at 5K pace. That's an interval run versus a 30 or 40 minute tempo run that's around your 10K pace. The amount of glycogen depletion was like 30% more than even though one, you feel better, and two, you ran slower, but you did actually more work, as you said. So you need more recovery time because you depleted more glycogen. But as you said exactly, people come back after 48 hours and they go do another workout. So then you deplete glycogen even more, and you keep coming in these depleted glycogen states. And then after 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you're burned out.